Okay, welcome. This is the part two of the chat with David Hundeyin. You all watched the part one. Yes, David, vintage David, he encapsulated everything, the politics of the world, how Africa see themselves, what needs to be done. This part two is a don't miss. You have to listen to it. David, in his usual self, has come out. He's told us what he's been up to. He's divested from some of his businesses. He's studying IT now. He's a man of challenges. So once again, we remember those of you in all the seven continents of the world, our subscribers, our viewers. We're on Spotify, so you can listen to everything also on Spotify. So when I say viewers and listeners, it captures everything. So enjoy this part two, and we'll be with you again next week, Friday, with another very, very fantastic and scintillating topic. Enjoy the video day. Bye. The Chinese option is not any better than the West. And also, couple with the fact that, I want to talk about that because it's not as if the Chinese are doing us African continent any favor also. Also, the Asians, the Malaysia, the Indonesia, the Singapore, they were all colonized by the West, by Britain, but they're not falling victim of the same plundering like the African.
So number one, regard to the Chinese model, yes, the Chinese they're not philanthropists, they're not being benevolent. However, the Chinese model aligns with African interests for now, for the simple reason that China sees its future as one where its way of building influence is to turn the whole world into its economic trading partner.
Mm.
That's how China sees it. The US sees its way of maintaining influence as turning the whole world into essentially a war zone, because war is the thing that America does best. Now, America has better weapons than everybody else, has bigger weapons contractors than everyone else. So it sees war as its way of maintaining its empire. The Chinese are also trying to build an empire of their own. In fact, you could argue they already have an empire of their own, but they are trying to build an empire on trade as against war. So it's just so happens that based on that Chinese economic philosophy, that if you're trying to bring someone into your geopolitical or your trading ambit, build a road. That's what the whole Belt and Road Initiative is about. They're bringing Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe into their economic ambit. And fortunately for us, it just so happens that that strategy of theirs, which is geared at making them more powerful, also benefits us because in the process they're building infrastructure that is already creating jobs and is already accelerating the African economy. So I don't think it's helpful to see the world in terms of who likes you or who doesn't like you or who is trying. No, nobody's trying to help anybody. Everybody just has interests, and some interests are not aligned. Like Europe and Africa, their interests are not aligned, but some interests are aligned. Now, having interests that are aligned doesn't mean that two of you are best friends because interests that are aligned can be disaligned tomorrow. China and India were once very, very aligned. Now, as I'm made to understand, there's no direct flight between China and India, even though they are next to each other. They are in a state of de facto war. So things can and will change. But for the moment, where the interests are aligned, you take all you can. That's just how geopolitics works. We shouldn't be we shouldn't be apologetic about that, and we shouldn't be naive about that. Even the US and China, who are the biggest geopolitical rivals now, they still do trade with each other.
A lot, yeah.
And the US is still one of China's biggest ever trading
They are
partners.
China's
The
biggest
US still,
yeah.
so we shouldn't feel embarrassed in any way to take all that we can take from the Chinese. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's what anyone would do. So Africans need to not view real politics or geopolitics as though Africa has committed one original sin that it now needs to repent from. And how you repent from that sin is that you don't deal with anybody and you have to develop only internally. No, that's not how it works. You take all you can. If it means doing deals with the Russians, you do deals with the Russians. If it means doing deals with North Koreans, you do deals with them. If it means doing specific deals with the Europe and the Americans, you do those deals too. Anything and you take all you can and you give nothing back. That's how the world works. Everybody's selfish. So we need to learn to be just as selfish as everybody else is. So if our interests coincide with the Chinese right now, I say let's go for it. I think the second point you made about how come these countries in Southeast Asia that also went through colonization
Yeah, they
um,
handle the
are
relationship
not.
better. Mhm.
Yeah, so I think especially those smaller countries like Singapore and Malaysia, I think one major advantage that they have compared to us is that they have this 800-pound gorilla next to them called China. So there's no way you can be in the neighborhood of a behemoth like China and part of that prosperity will not find its way to you. I mean, if Chinese prosperity is finding its way even to Africa, which is,
Africa, yeah.
thousands of miles away, imagine you're within China's immediate neighborhood. So a lot of these guys are not that intelligent, they're not that bright, they're not that special. They were blessed by the lottery of geography.
Proximity.
So like Singapore, for example, people often hold up Singapore as this example of, fantastic governance. And yes, Singapore did a lot of things right. Uh, Lee Kuan Yew did do a lot of things right, but people often forget that Singapore is a hop and a skip away from China, and that Singapore, as far back as the 50s and 60s, was already getting used as a trading proxy with China. So where you couldn't trade directly with the Chinese because they were ruled by a communist party or whatever, and their borders were closed for a while and all of that stuff, you could do business with them using Singapore and using Hong Kong, using Taiwan. And those places, as a result, became incredibly wealthy because of that. When you have 1 billion people and their economic value being created there, and you're in their neighborhood, and then you have the opportunity to be the bottleneck through which trade is going in and out, you will benefit from it now.
That's true. That's true.
So unfortunately, continent of Africa, we don't have that kind of geographical advantage with anyone because it's 54 poor countries basically.
Mhm. And I
So
also think
yeah,
the West, yeah, the West, because of the geopolitics involved, will not ignore a Filipino, will not ignore a Vietnam, a Cambodia, and all those. They want to make friends with them because of the proximity. Also, fantastic.
yeah,
Let's talk about journalism in Nigeria. There's been so much clampdown. The freedom of press is not really existing. But before we go into that, there was this story on Dangote refinery. I know you've said a lot about it in the past,
yeah.
that the refinery was not ready to be commissioned and all that. You've been vindicated clearly because it's still not firing full throttle, even though it's partially working. But there was this story about, I know you said the truth all the time, but you said some entity were trying to pay you to write a negative story about Dangote. Can you just shed some light on that for us?
Yeah, so it was an NGO called Dialogue Earth who reached out via their Africa office in Nairobi, uh, basically offering this brief
Hmm.
that writes this environmental critique of Dangote refinery. And um, I knew I was never going to do it because, first of all, why is this? Because I obviously took a look at the funding behind this entity that was sending me this thing. This funding is coming from the US. So this entity is based in London, its funding is American. Why are a bunch of white people telling me to write a critique of a piece of infrastructure in my country? Right. And then the premise of that critique is the second point, which is like that's a very, very that's something I feel very strongly about, which is this idea that somehow it is Africa's business whether some people have polluted the earth or not. That's not Africa's business. And I don't want to hear anything about Africa um, having climate targets and COP28 or Paris Agreement or anything. I'm not interested in any of that because Africa's only existential purpose right now is to build wealth and escape poverty. When we have built our wealth and escape poverty, when we can have children on the continent of Africa and know that these children can expect to grow up and live their whole lives on the continent of Africa without having to escape like we did.
Hmm.
When we're at that level where the Asians are at now, then we can start having conversations about reducing emissions, carbon transition, all that stuff, decarbonization, energy transition, green energy, blah, 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 blah. Even though a lot of that stuff is very much a chimera, it doesn't really exist, but at least we can start having those conversations when we get to that point. But you are looking at a poor man who is dying of thirst now, dying of hunger, his ribs are showing. And you're telling him he needs to go to the gym and lose weight. You know, you're a very wicked person and you're insulting his intelligence as well. in addition to being a wicked person and a gaslighter, you're also expecting that a journalist on the, who obviously is very well connected to what's happening on the ground is going to be so unintelligent, or is going to be so, bedazzled with the little peanuts you're dangling in front of his face that he will go and do something which is against his own interest. To be clear, I'm not a fan of Aliko Dangote at all,
Yeah, I
as you
know
may
this.
well know,
Mhm.
for so many reasons. I'm absolutely not a fan of the guy. I believe that a lot of what he refers to as entrepreneurship or business is actually cronyism, right? So I'm not a fan of the guy at all. However, I'm also intelligent enough to know that there is no such thing as um, a perfect economy with perfect competition where everybody gets to compete fairly and whatnot. In every economy in the world, people like Dangote exist. In fact, in places like Japan and South Korea, they actually have a formalized term for them. So in South Korea, they're called cables. In I think in Japan, they're called the daimyo or something like that, where you essentially have these high net worth individuals or industrial entities built around families that get special treatment from the government. It's a thing. They exist in America too. They exist everywhere. So I'm not a fan of the way he does business. I'm not a fan of the fact that he doesn't go into a sector and compete like everyone else, but he simply goes in there and gobbles up the whole space using state power and artificially dominates the economy that way. I'm not a fan of that. However, I also understand that everybody has these things. So what I'm more interested in is that this particular thing, which is the oil refinery, is it in Nigeria's national interest or not? Is it in Africa's economic interest or not? The answer is 100% it is. So that being the case, why a bunch of white people who, as we know, these global oil interests, they often work in the shadows using these shadow organizations to push these agenda. So potentially, I could basically be writing an article on behalf of Royal Dutch Shell, and I don't know, attacking a competitor.
Dangote, that's true. Mhm.
You know, so why the hell would I do that? So that's why I decided to go public with it. Look, if you're looking for someone to do your dirty work, please come out and fight him by yourself, or go and find another someone else who is willing to accept $500 to sell his people, because that person is not me. So that's what that was about.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so we're going to talk about clampdown journalists in Nigeria generally. I'm sure you know this guy, Isaac Bristol. I think he made bail eventually. So I don't know if he's officially
Yeah.
free now. Yeah, Pidon. So your name was coming up every now and then, and so I
Yeah.
just wanted you to clarify what really happened. I mean, I know the guy trusted you. He told you when he was arrested and all that. So what's your part of the story? I know you've talked about it, but just for our
He
viewers.
didn't he didn't tell me when he was arrested. I
Oh,
actually
you
did a
know.
post about this. So maybe you
Oh,
might
okay. I
want
didn't.
to
Maybe I
visit
missed
my Substack.
that. Okay.
Yeah. He didn't tell me, like, I didn't know, but
Mm.
about 2 weeks after he was arrested, someone reached out to me using his social media handle.
Oh, wow. 2 weeks after.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And this person was claiming to be his family member. And this person was suggesting to me that I should use the person actually sent me his login details and was telling me to log in and start
Wow.
impersonating him. And I obviously smelt a huge rat there
Mm.
because I mean, I haven't survived in this space for this long by being naive. I have an idea how Nigerian security
Oh, God.
agencies operate, right? And I know that first of all, if somebody is actually missing, and then I'm using the person's details, I'm impersonating the person, I'm putting myself inside trouble that I don't even understand. First of all, I don't know anything about what's going on. So why the hell am I? Who do I even know that I'm speaking to? This is just somebody who is claiming to be his family member. How do I know that's family member? How do I know it's not somebody in some studio at the DSS?
Mhm.
Because they do stuff like this. That's how intelligence and security people work. So I chose to raise the alarm instead. That look, this guy is missing, right? Because clearly someone like, how do I have access to this person's account? Because Peter will never send me his login details or anything like that. And we've had several conversations. He takes a lot of security precautions with his social media and whatnot. He has two-factor authentication and everything. So, How is it even possible
Mm.
that you just sent me a password and username and I was able to use that to log in? What happened to his two-factor authentication? That means you disabled it. You know, how did that happen? So I decided to go public with it, and that I believe is kind of is this probably what saved his life because um he was actually in detention at the Force Criminal Investigation Department in
Oh, wow.
Abuja, and prior to this thing becoming public, apparently they really had no intention of letting him go. They were just going to hold him there and just because they were torturing him basically. They kept him there for 6 days without food. First of all,
Oh,
they
wow.
kept him handcuffed for these 6 days. They the handcuffs dug so far into his flesh that he started having nerve problems. He started having difficulty controlling, I think his pinky finger or is his index. He said his index finger.
Oh, wow.
So he stopped feeling sensation
Oh, wow.
in it after a while. And there were just a number of things that they were doing to him. So it was a sort of psychological and physical torture. So I believe they would have killed him eventually
Oh, wow.
if that thing hadn't become public. So, but after I made it public, then a group of people came together to try and help him out. So, like Deji Adeonju, who was a lawyer that represented him, Yele Shore, Dele Farotimi, Adebayo Raphael, a few people like that came together. So I heard earlier today that he was granted bail, I think 5 million naira bail, which is not too bad. So yeah.
Fantastic. Now,
However, of the,
yeah,
it doesn't mean he's out. It doesn't mean he's out of
yeah, I
the deep
understand.
water
They
yet
will
because
arrest him and all that. Yeah. With this general clampdown on freedom of speech in Nigeria, what do you think the future of democracy is as a continent? Because the West clearly is condoning anybody that is doing their billing. I mean, as far as they're okay with the person. So let's quickly
yeah.
look at democracy in Africa. Maybe we'll look at Kenya, Nigeria, I was going to name 5 countries, but let's just do that too because of time. Future of democracy in Nigeria. Let's look at Kenya and Nigeria. What do you think it's the future of democracy? Because this clampdown continues. In Nigeria, for example, in the past, uh, people will vote at least, but the result might not count. Now, the elections were free in the past, but not fair. Now it's not free and fair at all. So, what do you think the future holds? And what has happened recently in Edo State looks like.
I think
Mhm.
I think there needs to be a total reset. I think the US has made it clear that it has no interest whatsoever in democracy, like it claims to have. It just doesn't care. I think that has been made abundantly clear
Mhm.
now. So I think there needs to be a sort of re-strategization now that it's clear to everyone that this 800-pound gorilla that made all those noises about democracy and freedom of this and freedom of that, rule of law, you know, due process, all of that good stuff. That these people are not different from the Russians and the Chinese that they always badmouthed. They're the same thing. They're exactly the same thing. They're just a lot more hypocritical about it. I think at this point, I mean, it's been a learning process for me as well because there are some positions I had
Everybody.
as recently as 18 months ago. There are some positions I held which I don't hold anymore. So
Mhm.
18 months ago, if you had asked me this question, I'd have said no matter what, democracy and elections must always remain. They are the gold standard of governance. I don't believe that any longer. At this point, um, I believe that we have to be realistic. In the well, I can't speak for the whole of Africa, but I can speak for West Africa. In the West African context, um, where you have a situation that you have a country that is being ruled from Paris. All of its policy decisions, local and foreign, are made in Paris. All of its monetary policy decisions are made in Paris. The president cannot jump without permission from the Banque de France and from the guy at the prime minister's office in Paris. Everything that happens in that country, economically, commercially, judicially, politically, everything is puppeted from abroad. But then they have this charade that they call an election, where people are, as you said, it's not free, it's not fair, it's just a charade. And the entire purpose of holding this election is so that a white guy can come out later and say that they have endorsed the result and call it free and fair. And then bring in a new puppet, a new French puppet, and claim that is democratically elected and duly recognized head of government in that country. How on earth is that democratic as compared to a military dictator wearing uniform and a beret who is not claiming to be democratic at all, but the the decisions being made and the moves being taken are being made in the national interest of that country. Now, people don't get an opportunity to vote on these decisions, but these decisions you can tell if you have a functioning pair of eyes and a brain between your ears. These decisions, generally speaking, are in the obvious basic interests of this country. And then the people who oppose these decisions being made and the person making these decisions claim that they are doing so in the interest of democracy. So what exactly is democracy then? Does democracy mean government of the people for the people by the people? Or does democracy mean government that is recognized by virtue of having come into power through a staged event that we euphemistically refer to as an election? Because the two things are not the same. So a government that is ruling in the interests of the people, that is governing the interests of the people, and that is even supported, that has popular support among the people, it's thought of by the people as their representative government, versus an imposed foreign entity that comes into power via a staged event. Which of those two is democratic? Because we seem to now be under the impression, based on the Western, the I don't want to use the word propaganda, but based on the Western um, heuristic, there's a more specific word I'm looking for. Okay. But based on this Western idea that for a government to be legitimate, for a government to be thought of as acceptable or good or decent, it has to have come into power via this staged event. What is not important is whether it's given to power through an election, or what's important is that it came to power through something you called an election. There's a very big distinction between the two, right? Because if the Western position was that the government has to come into power through an election, and it actually has to be an election, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I would actually be on the Western side of this conversation. But from what we've seen in places like Nigeria, where it's clear at presidential level and then state governorship elections, up to and including the one you referenced, the Edo election, which was an absolute farce in every conceivable way. It was a farce. Like even the person who won the who was declared the winner of the election, he doesn't care whether you. Everybody knows he didn't win the election, and he knows it as well. He doesn't care, which is why the first thing he did after being declared winner was that he went to Aso Rock to prostrate himself and basically declare obeisance and fealty to the
I
feudal
thought that was
lord
very
who
sad.
put him in office. He knows who put him in office. He knows it wasn't the people of Edo. He knows it was the Oga at the top who put him in office. That is, and then the US envoy came out and said the election was free and fair and it was peaceful. So based on that, what's the word I'm looking for? That recommendation, there's a more specific word I'm looking for. Based on that endorsement from the US, you then go around the world and say you are democratically elected, you are the duly recognized because you are democratically elected. And I'm supposed to be okay with that because the US said so. No, I don't give a crap what the US said. I honestly don't. So if like right now, if there were to be a coup in Nigeria, for example, and a military administration was coming to office that were to start taking decisions that were in Nigeria's basic national interest, would I now say no? You people should go back to the barracks. I don't want you. Tinubu should come back because he's elected, even though nobody elected him. So, which is why a lot of my energy nowadays is reserved for the AES countries, because I believe that in the entire West and Central African part of the continent, I think as imperfect as those countries are, because they are very imperfect as they are, I think they are the countries that have the closest thing to some sort of progressive idea for what their national future should look like, right? Because bear in mind, these are countries that, if they were functioning according to how the Western world, France and the US liked them to function, then they would have been exactly the way they were prior to all of this. which is completely useless. They were completely useless countries
True.
and
True.
nobody ever saw or heard about.
Mm.
You never saw Burkina Faso in world news for any reason.
No,
You
even
never saw
Nigeria.
Mali in world
Mm.
news for any reason,
It's
or
always
Niger.
for
What
famine, hunger, or something like that.
and even then it's maybe once or twice in 2 years. They just didn't exist.
Oh God.
Right? Now they are showing ambition.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They are showing ambition.
Strategic
Like
ambition.
they
Yeah.
actually they actually want to be something. So whether that comes from signing nuclear agreements with Russia and Iran, defense partnerships with Russia, trade partnerships with China, trying to build local industrial capacity, cutting off colonial control and ties from France, what I see is that ambition. And I respond very, very strongly to that because I believe that's like the number one thing that Africa lacks. It's just ambition. So, if you now compare them to Cameroon, and then you say Paul Biya is elected, so I should rate Paul Biya higher than I rate Captain Traore or Assimi Goita or Abdurrahman Chiani. Why on earth would I do that?
Mm.
So I think that democracy is still the gold standard of governance. However, I think what we define as democracy needs to change.
Mm.
I think the word election and the word democracy, those two words don't mean the same thing. And I think people often confuse them. Because once you reduce democracy to election, then what that just simply means is that once somebody can hold an event and call it an election, and you can't say that the election wasn't an election. The most you can say is, oh, it wasn't free, it wasn't fair, it was rigged, blah blah blah. But it was an election, Abi.
Mm-hmm.
And then nobody cares anymore. They say it's democratic. That's the trick that I've seen that has been used to completely co-opt the entire edifice of leadership in Africa now. Any idiot can be placed into power as long as you can stage something and call it an election. That's it. Nobody can talk again.
Yeah.
I fundamentally disagree with that. I disagree with that idea that holding a staged event that doesn't have credibility makes you credible because the staged event is called an election. And then one white guy stood in front of a microphone afterwards and endorsed it. So me, who is actually suffering on ground, my life is worth nothing, and my opinion is worth nothing. My lived experience is worth nothing, because one fat white dude from Washington D.C. came to Abuja and said the election was free and fair, and that makes everything okay. No, I disagree.
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it just reminds me of the Cold War era where the Western world will tolerate every Mobutu, every Yadema, so that they don't go
Yeah,
socialist and all that. Now, I mean, after the Cold War, a lot of them were dumped. Mobutu was dumped and all that. But I think we are back to that period again because they don't want this to. I mean, look at the Kenyan president. He was given a red carpet, fantastic reception in the United States because he was helping in
of course
Haiti
it
and all
was.
that. Yeah, and he grew wings, wanted to punish his people with a lot of reforms, and lo and behold, Nairobi erupted. So we're going to round up now. I have two more questions, but I'll lump them together.
Yeah.
Now, the two questions are you disappointed in Nigerians in diaspora? I mean, considering the exposure and what have you, a lot of them are, I mean, they're not different from, their reason is not, it's not particularly different from those that domiciled in Nigeria. So the question, are you disappointed with them? Now, the final one will, the US clearly supports Tinubu. I mean, for obvious reasons, he has a lot of baggages and they have his file and all that. That's common knowledge. Nobody's going to hold that against anybody, and is ready to do the Western billing and all that. Do you think there's a chance the West could dump him in the future? Those are my last two questions, and we'll end it at that.
Sorry, I completely forgot the first question.
Yeah,
Just
I said,
five
are
minutes,
you
five
disappointed in
seconds.
Nigerians in diaspora?
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right, right. Yes and no.
Hmm.
So yes, in the sense that I feel like um with the numbers that they have and with the amount of economic power that they have, I feel like they don't exert as much influence at home. They exert practically no influence at
No
home.
influence,
The
exactly.
only thing Nigerians in diaspora are known for is sending money home, giveaways.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that they are known for. That every once or twice or three times a month, they open the LendFi app. And because their pounds and dollars are now worth more, every $150 they send now It's big money back home. So it's a bonanza for their families now. That's what Nigerians in diaspora are known for. They're known for being the superstar of their families. But there is no, and I've said this multiple times, that Nigerians in diaspora, I think at a conservative estimate, very conservative estimate, would put the total population of diaspora Nigerians. Let me not say diaspora, let me say first generation diaspora Nigerians. That's Nigerian people who have lived a significant portion of their life in Nigeria. I'll say 2 million.
Mm.
Some estimates have it as many as 10 million when you include second or third generation. But let's say 2 million Nigerians live in the diaspora. If of those 2 million, just 50,000 of them were able to set aside just $1,000 a year for, be it political engagement, be it funding independent media, be it social, what's the word I'm looking for? Social intervention. Because another problem is that the NGO and CSO space in Nigeria is almost entirely funded by foreign governments and foreign intelligence interests. Almost entirely, right? If the Nigerian diaspora, if just 50,000 successful people from Nigeria's diaspora, 50,000 is a very, very, like, it could be easily 10 or 100 times that. But if just 50,000 people from Nigeria's diaspora who dedicate $1,000 a year to intervention back home, that's $50 million worth of engagement in Nigeria. Imagine what they could do with that. They could fund they could fund an integrated media platform that's multi-channel, print, digital, TV, radio, everything. They could fund a grassroots political party. I'm not talking about a political party that's trying to win presidency. A grassroots political party, they could do that, maybe in some localized areas. They could fund NGOs, because a typical NGO in Abuja, total annual budget, maybe $40,000. They could fund multiple such NGOs doing specific social interventions that they will be able to monitor and control. But they're not doing any of that. And it's not because they lack the capital, it's not because they lack the money, but again, there's just that the same problem we have when we're in Nigeria, which is lack of societal purpose. That problem doesn't go away when we leave Nigeria. It just follows us, because even in the diaspora, even where we are in the diaspora, even in those places, I'm not even talking about doing stuff back home now. Even in those places, we can't even organize ourselves effectively
Absolutely.
in those
Yeah. I see
places
that all the time.
to build, yeah, to build cultural and economic power centers, power bases. We can't do that. We don't. So we go abroad and it still ends up being this man trying to, if this man is not trying to show off to this next man, I have bigger house than you, I drive better car than you, I have better job than you, then it's, oh, this one is trying to sleep with this one's wife. And it's just the same old petty nonsense.
Mm.
So
Easy
it's like,
Yoruba. I want to be
yeah,
president of this association. You can't trust that one.
exactly,
Yeah, that kind of thing.
exactly, exactly. So that's why I say yes, but also no, because ultimately the responsibility for fixing Nigeria will always come from people who are living in the 36 states of Nigeria.
Mm.
That's where the ultimate responsibility lies.
Mm.
So I use football as a case in point. The most successful era of Nigeria's national football team, Super Eagles, came with a generation of players who, all of them, number 1 to number 24, every single member of that squad played at least 1 or 2 seasons in the Nigerian Football League
Mm.
as young, young players before maybe they were scouted and they moved abroad or whatnot. So there was an actual local tradition that sort of was inculcated into them. So they actually understood what it meant to play for Nigeria. Nigeria actually had a fluid footballing style, and that translated to the global stage. That's the most successful generation. That's the generation between 94 and 2002. What we have now, extending that footballing um, illustration, what we have now is a group of mostly diaspora born Nigerians, or even the ones who were born locally, they never played in the league. Maybe from the academies, they went straight to Europe. And then you put this mishmash, hodgepodge of players together. And you are watching Nigeria. It's the green, white, green jersey. Like, but you are not watching Nigeria. You don't know what
Yeah,
you're watching.
I feel
There's
you.
no sense of identity on the field.
There's a disconnect. I know.
Yeah. So that's I believe is a sort of key illustration for how Nigeria could work if it's going to work. The ultimate responsibility for fixing Nigeria comes from Nigerians who are living in Nigeria. There will always be a measure of um, contribution that has to be had from those in the diaspora. But those living at home have the ultimate power. Those living at home, if those living at home decide today, as we're talking right now, if they decide that before tomorrow morning, they don't want Bola Tinubu to be the president, by tomorrow morning, he will not be the president.
Agreed. Agreed. So, but that's
So
my last question. Do you think when push comes to shove, the West will dump Bola Tinubu? Because there's pressure now. I mean, the owners of Nigeria they are assembling the Aliu Guso, the IBB, the OBJ,
I
the
saw that.
Agbala.
I
Yeah,
saw
they are
that.
assembling, and they're clearly. I mean, you don't need to be a soothsayer to know what they discuss and all that. They are assembling, and the ship of state is now rudderless. So, do you think the West will hold on continuously, even at the expense of disintegration of Nigeria, economical
I think they will.
Hmm.
I think they will for the simple reason that right now the unprecedented situation in the Sahel has
Hmm.
made it such that they face a very real possibility now that if Nigeria is allowed to slip out of their ambit, out of their control,
Hmm.
then they could essentially have lost West Africa. Because if Nigeria slips out of their control, then Benin automatically also goes the same way because Benin is basically Nigeria's 37 states.
Hmm.
Whatever control they have in Togo is also very nominal because basically that's um, Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana. That group of countries works in very close diplomatic cooperation. It's almost unheard of for those four countries to not be aligned.
Hmm.
So if for whatever reason Nigeria, which is by far the biggest player in that space, becomes aligned with the AES, the only country in West Africa that the French especially, and by extension NATO and the West will have any real stronghold in will be Cote d'Ivoire.
Hmm.
It will just be Cote d'Ivoire. I know they have some little presence in Guinea now, but Guinea is next to Burkina Faso. Like any small ground invasion from Burkina
Guinea is
Faso, Guinea
neither
is
here
is
nor
the
there
end of it.
today. You can't even
Yeah.
place them. Yeah.
So really, it's just Cote d'Ivoire. Senegal, yes, they are in there, but clearly the Senegalese people don't want them there, and
Hmm.
they are very well aware of this. All it takes is just a little spark, and the kind of revolutions we saw in the Sahel will also happen in Senegal. They are aware of that.
Hmm.
So Cote d'Ivoire is their last real vassal state in West Africa after Nigeria. Nigeria is number one vassal, and then Cote d'Ivoire. So if they withdraw backing for Tinubu, there is every possibility that Nigeria becomes aligned with its northern neighbors, as Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and
But
then
what if
these guys have a real problem.
the likely person or persons that will take over will toe the line of the West? Because if the way Nigeria is going, you don't need a soothsayer to tell you that the center may not hold for long. Things cannot go on like this. So even if they like I mean, whoever comes, it could be military, it could be a new democratic leader, whatever. Even if that person decides to toe the line of the West, you think the West still will support the person?
I think whoever supports the line of the West at this point, maybe to be like an Obasanjo type. Obasanjo was a Western guy when he came into power. We all know that. However, we also saw that it was pro-Western with a very big asterisk
Hmm.
because a lot of the things they wanted him to do, he didn't do. They wanted to open a military base in Nigeria. Somehow he made sure that never happened under his administration. There were a lot of things that they wanted, and those things just did not happen. He somehow made it such that I'm not saying he was a great, fantastic, wonderful president, but I am saying that he somehow found a way. He's one of the few Nigerian heads of state I've ever seen that was intelligent enough to find a way to play both sides of the of the board. So the CIA were very confident that this is our guy. But at the same time, he wasn't selling Nigeria the way like a Buhari or a Tinubu has done. Quite the opposite, in fact. So most of the things that we even came to enjoy in the Northeast, most of the things that led to Nigeria's then world leading economic growth were were reforms that he put in place, sometimes in the face of real opposition. So the creation of a local content act in the oil industry. I know the Americans really pushed against that. He made it happen somehow. There are a few things like that. So I think that whoever comes, if Tinubu does not survive, which at this point I don't think it's a fair complete that he's not going to survive. Because if there's one thing Nigeria has taught me over the past 1 year is that no matter how high you think the capacity of Nigerians is to suffer, it's higher than what you think. So Nigerians will, like, right now, Nigerians have stopped complaining. I don't know if you've realized it. They've stopped complaining. So, fuel price has hit 1,400 naira per liter. Have you heard anybody complaining again?
No.
Nigerians have adjusted. Bag of rice costs 100,000 naira. Everybody has adjusted. This has happened. Nobody's complaining again. What are the biggest trending topics on social media in Nigeria this week? It's Bobrisky and Very Dark Man. I checked the number one trending topic on Nigerian Twitter today. It was Pray for Brighton, which is a reference to a football match tomorrow.
Okay.
So, to be honest, I'm not entirely convinced that there's, and then the so-called owners of Nigeria. I think that this is not the first time they've tried to have some sort of intervention over the past year and a half. I don't think it's the first time. I think all the other previous attempts have failed. I think this one will too, because I think those guys simply don't wield as much influence as they once did. I think the Americans have done a very, very, very good job of what's the word I'm looking for? Of degrading the capacities of most local actors, including the military, by the way. Because at this point, it doesn't even look like even the military is going to save anybody. The military looks just as helpless and helpless as everybody else. Yeah. So, I mean, which is why I keep on saying that it will always come down to the average Nigerian on the street. Right? That guy who is tweeting Pray for Brighton, and who is tweeting about Very Dark Man and Bobrisky and Femi Falana right now. When that guy decides that the proverbial water has passed his own Gary, that his own threshold for pain has been breached, and he's no longer willing or able to adjust. When that guy reaches that point, then that reordering of things will happen, and it will happen very rapidly. But we simply haven't got to that point yet. Nigerians haven't suffered enough. Nigerians are still very, very, very okay. And I know this because I talk to Nigerians on the ground every day. The only complaint I hear is, things have become more expensive. This one don't add price. But that's it. Once you manage and send them some small 50 pounds, everybody's happy again. Everybody's happy again. So I don't sense any revolutionary energy in the air on the ground. So even if the owners of Nigeria want to make a move, as you well know, for even if it's a military intervention or whatnot, it still needs local support to be successful.
True.
And the Nigerians I'm seeing are people I think are going to be like traffic cones. They're going to be indifferent. They see themselves as spectators in their own country as against protagonists.
Fantastic. Thank you, David Hundeyin. Thank you for your time. Yeah, it's been a while. We spoke to you, so we had to maximize it. Thank you. Thank you so much. So our viewers, it's a wrap there. We gotta go. David, thank you. And you're still a man for 2023. I'm sure people see you today when we decide to vote in December again. Most likely they appreciate what you've done. You always shed light on it. You're true to power. We respect that so much. We wish you good luck in all your future endeavors and stay safe, and we'll continue to get in touch. Take care. It's a wrap.
All right.
Bye. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.